Welcome to the Daring to Dad podcast, where we have conversations at the intersections of fatherhood, masculinity, and faith. I'm your host, Ryan Walton, and today we have an exceptional guest whose life and work bridge these realms together with passion and purpose. He's a writer, wilderness guide, men's work leader, somatic meditation leader. He's been the key figure in the global men's movement. He's committed to bringing our wildness and love out into the open, and his comfort and passion really lie in nature, where he shares transformative practices. Many of you have probably heard him before. He's been on the Joe Rogan Experience 3 times, worked as a wilderness therapy guide, taught in inner city schools. He's even produced over 50 episodes of Man Eater, where he's left a significant mark on outdoor television. He's the founder of Everyman, has led impactful retreats, hosted podcasts. I could go on and on. Dan Doty is our guest today, and I am thrilled to bring you our conversation. So let's get into it. Hey, Dan, thanks so much for joining the Daring to Dad podcast. So good to see you.
Very welcome, man. Excited to be here.
Yeah, this is a conversation I was looking forward to. This podcast is newer for me, and you were one of the top people on my list to try to pin down to have this conversation. You've been doing this work for a long time, and just because I always feel like it's great to hear in your own words, maybe for people who aren't familiar with you, maybe set some context as to kind of what you're up to in the world.
Yeah, I'll try. I'll do my best. I guess it's not that complicated anymore, but I live on the coast of Maine. I'm looking at the ocean right now. I have 3 kids. My oldest is about to turn 8. My youngest is 2. We moved here to Maine in the pandemic in 2020. Right prior to that, we were living in a RV. We did the full minimal life thing on an RV on a farm in California, which was amazing. What am I up to in the world? I have been working with men in sort of intimate transformational capacities for over 20 years. It's kind of weird I can say over 20 years, but over 20 years now. And currently what I do is part of my life is I'm an executive coach, and I work with a lot of CEOs and leaders and teams and that's part of my business. But my real passion is supporting men, and I have honed that specifically into supporting and teaching and advocating for fathers, and I'm even honing that a bit further right now into offering support for expecting dads, which is something I'm just super stoked on, and putting a lot of marbles or eggs in that basket, I guess, right now.
Yeah, it's amazing. I love seeing the work you're doing, and especially some of the work you do in the outdoors, which is, I know, a passion of yours. Like, that's a big part of your work, and I love seeing that too. That's always been a passion of yours, is leading men out into the wild.
I mean, that's how I started, right? And so when I say over 20 years, when I was 22, I did my first. Actually, it was a month ago, 20 years ago. I got my first job as a wilderness therapy guide. And so I took a flight to Utah and got picked up in a stinky van, and then got dropped off literally in the middle of the desert with like 8 other stinky people, and got trained to be with adolescent boys in a therapeutic capacity. And that was the start, man. That was the beginning of the whole thing. And, I did that for about 4.5, 5 years, and it gave me purpose and a clear mission and a clear passion, and I would even say an obsession. And the thing that got me more than anything else was working with boys and their fathers in the wilderness, and having the experience of seeing firsthand what I knew from my own life, but I saw it in front of me over and over, where these young men and their fathers had like castle walls built between them, like thick, impermeable, invisible structures that blocked the connection between them. And then I got to be there when that got blown up, and fathers and sons ended up sobbing in each other's arms and expressing how much they cared and how much love and everything was there. And that fucked me up, and still does. And that's literally what put me on this path 20 years ago.
Oh, that's incredible. I want to hear more about that, but to go along with that line of thinking, getting to know a little bit about you, and talking about boys and their fathers. Maybe they think about you as a boy, and I'm curious to know. This is a question I've been asking folks about. When you were that boy, what influenced your views about being a man? What were the impressions that were pressed upon you as a boy?
Yeah, it's fun to think about that. What's interesting is like answering that question or fielding that question now, as I get older and hopefully a little healthier and I don't know, just more breadth in my way of thinking and feeling. I'm like, oh, it's just me. Like I can see like who I am today. I can see the same qualities, right? So I was a very, very sensitive kid, not necessarily emotional. I wasn't like a weepy kid, but I was energetically or sort of subtly sensitive. So I felt everything that was happening. And I was also very inward. I read a lot. I was I think I was a weirdo. I would lay in bed at night just like endlessly tripping out about eternity and death, and I was like, I was into church, right? There was an aptitude or an interest in that kind of thing. In terms of what was impressed on me, in terms of manhood or masculinity or things, my dad was always there, and he loved me immensely, and he was proud of me throughout my whole life, and that never wavered, and I always knew that. And we had those barriers between us too, in a really, really big way. And without sharing too much personal detail of his, he was hurting immensely, and was all alone and had no one to go to, and never did have anyone to go to. And so there was an immense amount of pain underneath the surface, and I also always felt it. But it was just never talked about. It never surfaced, right? It never came up. But he was a hard worker, and he was he's a good man. And at the same time, there was enough tension in the house where I remember like the hair on the back of my neck would stand up sometimes when he was around. Like there's a lot of bracing energy, and it wasn't easy. There's a lot of good, and then there was this sort of undercurrent of hidden tension. But what I would say, which is really important, I think, too, is that I do not think it's just Dad's job, and it can't just be Dad's job to be the sole impressor upon, right? And so one of the biggest influences in my young life was my martial arts instructor. His name was Master Mike, and I started at a young age. And this was in a tiny town in North Dakota. And this dude was just like a fucking badass, man. He just like walked chest out, was like drove a sports car, took me to shoot machine guns, and put me on the back of his Kawasaki Ninja, and like we went 160 miles an hour, like shit my mom would not have wanted to know about.
That's amazing.
But like I took to it like, a black fly to the back of my son's neck at night, right? Like I just took to it, man.
Yeah.
So,
over time, have you felt like some of these initial impressions about like, being a man and what it meant to like be a man in the world, have those shifted over time? And if so, how have those shifted for you since you were a boy?
I mean, I think they've both stayed the same, and I think they've also shifted, like, fundamentally, right? A huge part of my work, right? I founded an organization called Every Man and left 3+ years ago now, where the entire purpose of that organization is to teach men vulnerability and emotional skill sets, right? And to model and share and help men open their hearts and their bodies and learn how to relate in a really direct human way. And that wasn't present when I was a kid. That was like, not only did men not do it, nobody did it in my world, right? Where I grew up, that just wasn't a thing. I mean, there's no physical contact in our family, right? It was not there's not intimacy in a lot of the ways that you would probably describe, right? There's so much love, so much care, but not a lot of that intimacy in certain ways. So that's a major way it shifted. I also think, in the last couple years specifically, after having done so much diving into the vulnerability part and that element, these last 3 years, I've sort of honed my work or opened up and shifted to, I really feel like what I used to say is the measure of a man is how much he can authentically be himself, right? How much he can authentically be transparent from the inside to the outside. Can he bring forth what's in there? And I think there's still something that grabs me about that. But I don't know. I think, especially in the context of dads, like there's a lot. There's a lot expected of us, which I think is good news. And there's just, I just feel like we're in a place now where masculinity and manhood is really, it's not that it's undefined, but it's somehow unlimited, right? Like it's obviously not the case that manliness has anything to do with vulnerability or not vulnerability, or hard work or not hard work, or whatever, right? I think that I think we're humans first, right? And I think that we play a role, right? We play roles. I have a role in my family. I have a role in the world. I have a role in different places, and that asks different things of me. But fundamentally, I and other men are humans, and we have capacities in every single direction, like all types of capacity: spiritual, emotional, somatic, relational, social, like all of these things, and all of that goes into being a man.
Feels like, and perhaps every generation of people say something like this, that we're at this somehow like crossroads, or we're at this interesting point right now in this conversation with men, which then obviously bleeds into fatherhood, right? There's these cultural things that have been taking place around us, and when I say culture, obviously you and I, we live in the United States, so sometimes these are specific to maybe our own culture, but things like the Me Too, a lot of political issues that have been going on in the United States have kind of brought this whole conversation around masculinity and manhood to the surface. I've always really found your way of kind of talking about this and what we're facing as men and fathers in really profound ways. Can you speak to that a little bit? Like, what is this moment for us as men?
Yeah, well, I think there's a lot of moments, but the one that I'll speak to is by sharing a source and a reference that some men might bristle at the recommendation of reading a book by Bell Hooks, one of the most sort of important and brilliant feminist writers, and thinkers. Yeah. And her book, The Will to Change, she wrote in the 90s. And it is the most accurate and spot on representation of what's happened to the male psyche that I've ever found. And it frames out very, very simply that the way we have been socializing our boys, by stopping in early stages of life, by stopping their emotional flow, by stopping their relational capacity, by forming them into something that is separate, that is less feeling, that is less human. Honestly, it's created like a soul level wound, like a fuckery of like as deep as you can imagine. And the I spent a lot of my career not using the term patriarchy, but that's ridiculous. And her historical description of how the large overculture, call it the patriarchy, call it whatever you want, how that has hurt us as men. This book describes it in perfect detail. And so I don't think it's common knowledge yet. I don't think it's the mass media. It's not it's not our overculture yet. But what I do believe is happening is enough. There is a wave of some size of understanding that is realizing how the norms that we've been living with about men as the dominator and there's an awakening realization that not that we're all victims. You could say that, right? Maybe we're all victims of the system that we've been born into, but the language that I prefer is just like a much more loving and clear and accurate representation of how much it sucks for everybody to be under these old norms and habits. And breaking patterns and transition is just hard. It's just hard. It's not easy, right? And I don't know, man. I don't know if we can say that, okay, we're going through this transition and there's a clear field up ahead of us, right? Here's the future that we're working toward, like the health of men, the mental health, the balance between genders, the openness to all people, all, like we're headed there. Like, I don't fucking know. But I think, in my little bubble, and maybe our bubbles overlap enough to say, is that there certainly is something happening where men are at least some men are given some opportunity to evolve into something more holistic and more human, fundamentally human. And what I care about more than anything is catching dads so that we can raise our next generation from a place of more wholeness and health.
What do you think are some of those specific shifts that are happening right now with the modern dad, right? Like there's a new kind of expectation, a call. I think you've even used the word in some of your writings as maybe like a mandate on the modern dad, and it's a shift from previous generations. What are some of those things?
Yeah. Well, I mean, before I rattle them off, just invite the listeners to think about your own father or father figure or the generation above you, and what was expected of them, either explicitly or implicitly, right? What was their job? What was their role and responsibility? I was born in the 80s, right? The early 80s. I'm 42 right now. In my generation, my dad and my friends' dads, and at least in my culture and in my little bubble again, was still primarily providing financial resources and whatever level of protection, right? It was still quite traditional, the provider and the protector. And, dads, I don't know, sometimes they'd be baseball coaches and some were more involved than others and some weren't. But if you actually broke that out into roles and responsibilities, and now you compared that with someone today, like myself, which is like a birth partner. Let's start there, right? Like the main birth partner to my wife, a postpartum caregiver, a deeply nurturing infant care, dad, full relational partner with awareness, like increased mindfulness and self-awareness across the board, a full and equal household partner. If you're familiar with the work of Eve Rodsky and the Fair Play deck and the Fair Play books, it's just like there's a revolution happening in terms of housework and the invisible workload that's often put on mothers. So there's a trend toward taking on more than that. And you know what else? The old stuff still sticks, right? Most dads still have a need for earning. It's different in every family, but then the protecting thing sticks too. But that's one of the places where it's really confusing, because the protecting right now is complicated as fuck, right? Yeah. It's like, what do our kids actually need? There's things our kids need protection from, and some of the easy one to think about are phones and social media and things. But God, it's a complicated, messy world right now. So it's a moment, man. It really is. The last thing I want to say, just before I cap that off, I think it's fantastic news. I think it's a fantastic fucking opportunity for men.
Why is that?
Because it's going to force us to evolve. It's going to force us to grow up if we take it on. I cannot imagine a more perfectly scripted challenge course for us to grow up and become our full self and build out our capacity as human beings.
Yeah.
It's just, it's hard.
I was just putting out there on social media just yesterday, doing a little survey about some of the confusing messages that guys do get, and men do get these days, and that often a lot of guys feel paralyzed. Do I need to be like tough and stoic and Mr. Provider Protector, or do I need to be soft and sensitive? And we're trying to figure out how to create like this kind of fullness that you're talking about, and they find themselves kind of paralyzed because perhaps it's the cost of messing up and fumbling through the learning of that and what that might cost them. Do you know what I mean? Like, a lot of guys find themselves confusing. What would you say to guys who find themselves kind of wrestling with this new way of being?
Yeah. I mean, you should feel upside down. I mean, there's no way you would be good at all of this stuff yet. It's absolutely crazy to think that you would have a handle on any of this, right? Like, we're talking about breaking hundreds, if not thousands of year-old patterns, societal patterns, right? We're talking about men breaking norms that are, this is not like something we picked up at the fucking grocery store last week, right? This is the way things were. This is the way things still are in so many ways. And so, first of all, take a breath. You're fine, right? You're aware, right? Awareness is the first step. But I think maybe something that alleviates the confusion, but which requires sort of like a leap in consciousness, is it's both. It's all. Should you be a stoic and strong man? Fucking probably. Should you be vulnerable and soft and caring? Yeah, fucking for sure. At the same time, not necessarily, right? It's not like... But and actually, this is something I'm excited to share, is that I have this sort of like pet hypothesis that I've been sort of building on, which is that if we want to have a definition of masculinity, and I don't think we need to, if we want to like have a clear snapshot, I would say look at a father who is relatively healthy and fully engaged in life as much as he can be. Because I think that is a snapshot. That is a snapshot of the qualities that can be asked of us, right? Like, when I go to work, I have to be fucking on point. I have to be organized. I have to be directed. I have to get after it. I have to be ambitious. When I go home and my daughter wants me to push her on the swing for 90 minutes straight, right? I need to be patient. I need to be slow. Yeah, I need to be present. I need to connect with her. There's just so much. Life is so full. Right? But here's why it's exciting, is we get to participate in all of it. And we may not know what that means, but I promise you that the men who lean in and find themselves, and you have to flounder for a while. Like there's a learning curve to everything, but building our capacities in the ways that we're not used to is so overwhelmingly rewarding when we go through it.
I love that. I think about just the so many ups and downs in my own day, and the different versions of myself that need to be pulled forth, and one, the skills that's required to connect with all of these components of ourselves, and you're right, that's a really exciting adventure to go on. Sometimes I like to just gravitate back into those areas that are comfortable for me, but it's a really beautiful thing. One of the things I hear a lot, from people around. Oh, dude, go ahead. You were going to say something.
Let me offer a simpler version, right? Because as I was saying that, I recognize that's like a big, gnarly octopus of a path, right? There's something really simple, a lot simpler.
Yeah,
and that is to learn to slow down and be present with where you are and who you're with, regardless of the scenario, right? And that thereby trusting that innate within you have the capacity for each of these things. Not now, right? And if you do that, you may find, I might need to learn how to speak to my partner honestly, right? And I might need to practice that, or I might need to but I think a simple path into it is, can I slow down? Can I just be with what's happening? And can I, this is a part that's been really big in my work lately too, is just, can I not slaughter myself in the process? Can I stop being so fucking violent to myself? And I think that's such a deep, big thing for men, and I think it's hard to get too far without addressing that.
What do you say to a guy who's sitting there we hear a lot like about this idea of being present, right? We want to be present as men. If you're a guy sitting there thinking, how in the world do I do that? Like, where do I even start? Like, my mind is going a million different places all the time between all the different responsibilities and all the different things that I'm trying to manage my own internal upheaval. Where do I start? What are things that you lead guys through to help them get there?
Step 1, locate some experience where you're not in your head. Just think it through during your day. What is one moment when you're not in your head, right? So I think the first distinguisher of being in your head or not in your head is deeply helpful. And I'm also not talking about being fast asleep. And I'm also ideally not, after half of a joint or 3 beers, right? So how can you get out of your head and be aware that you're not in your head? That's a good starting point. That gives you the experiential knowledge that it's possible, right? That something other than being caught in your head is possible. The next step would be to begin to cultivate a replicatable experience of not being in your head, right? So for some guys, it might be a round of golf. For me, it's, my meditation practice, or it's a walk in the woods, or it's, there's a handful of different things. And there is as you do this, start to pay attention to what happens when you're not in your head, right? Just like what happens to people around you, what happens in your body, what happens to your breath, and just like start to notice that. And I'll give one very specific exercise, which I think is fun and a good place to start for dads specifically, is sometime when you're with your kids, kid or kids, take a timer, put your phone on airplane or turn it off, turn a timer on for 15 minutes and treat that like a meditation. But your job for 15 minutes is to get down on eye level with your kid and just immerse yourself in their world. That's it. For 15 minutes until the timer goes off. And if your mind goes away, if you're thinking about something else, don't worry. Just come back. Reconnect. Drop back in, right? Play, read, listen, whatever's going on. Just put your attention in your child's world. And I think that's a cool kind of double-dipping technique for dads to start to play with that.
I love that. Would you say that also a lot of your work, getting in the outdoors in the wild, is that also connected to that? Does that hit for you when it comes to presence?
Dude, all the way. I mean, if you're out there and it's quiet and you don't have your phone on and you're not plugged into things, what are you aware of? You're aware of your surroundings, maybe, but the first thing you're probably aware is this like screaming voice in your head, right? Or the multiple voices, right? So it puts you right into, like a fully unobstructed relationship with your mind, And so for me as a young kid in my 20s, I spent, I don't know how many thousands of miles I backpacked, right? And like how many hundreds or thousands of hours of being out in the quiet where there was nowhere to go, nothing to do. And, you do that long enough and a few things happen. One of the cool things that happen is you naturally have to become aware of your body, right? When you're out there. You have to know when you're thirsty. You have to know when you're tired. You have to pay attention to your body. You have to pay attention to your surroundings. You have to take care of yourself. You have to put, so the primal basics of being embodied happen naturally. You just come back to your experience, right? And that juxtaposed with just the lack of noise that could cloud up your mind stream, where you start to, notice. And I think there is a natural process. There's a natural process of, your body becomes more alive, your energy becomes more alive, your mind gets more quiet, and you notice it all. It's remarkable.
Dan, as men, where do we put our anger? And this is a question that's I've been thinking about lately, just in my own personal life. It's kind of a guy who for most of my life has kind of been a nice guy, wanting to make people happy and feel good. I've worked with a lot of other guys who struggle with where to put the anger.
Yeah.
That we feel.
Yeah.
Where do we do with that?
I'll name a couple, and some of the best teaching around anger that I've ever come across was from my mentor, Owen Marcus, who was part of Every Man. No longer is either, but here's some spots to put your anger. One is the care of a really good therapist, right? And so, I'm currently doing a round of therapy with an IFS trained therapist, internal family systems, and I'm just blown away, absolutely blown away by the impact and the effectiveness of learning about the parts of myself and, and literally having the space to sort of feel the anger, but then get all the way underneath it and around it and love it, right? So maybe that's one answer is it's not anything to put anywhere. It's something that at its inception point needs some love and attention and care, right? That's one answer. Another answer, which I think is really true, is Owen would talk about how anger is the sacred no. Anger is the sort of primal function of protection and saying you're crossing a boundary. This is not safe. No, right? And so a great place to put anger is boundaries, right? To work with that energy on a loving way and start to, put boundaries around to protect your agency and your sanctity and your health and your family or whatever it is, right? And it might come off a little sharp at first. That process of building boundaries takes a while, and it's good to get some guidance around it. And you said Nice Guy. I'm sure you're aware of No More Mr. Nice Guy by Robert Glover. Great book, and talks about codependence and how to sort of begin to move away from that. So that's another place to put it, in the boundaries, right? And the last one I would name is there's some goodness to catharsis too, right? And so whether that's hitting a heavy bag or journaling, or we used to do these things at Every Man called anger ceremonies, where we'd go in the woods and let it fucking rip, just scream and hit and yell and all of that. That can be a profoundly transformative experience. The last one I'll offer is for the dad who gets impatient and wants to snap at their kids, because that's all of us, I would say. And if not, you got
Sure.
something going on. But
yeah,
what to do with that anger? I would say learn to love what's going on and not beat yourself up for having it, but just work on softening your edges. Work on saying it in clear ways. And the phrase I'm really angry right now is pretty powerful, right? Rather than running that anger through your voice, but just catching it and say, hey, I'm getting pissed. That's what I try to do. I get my boys and trust me, I bark at my kids as much as anybody, but I try to be hey, I'm getting really pissed off right now, rather than being a shithead. So.
Yeah. What is giving you the most hope right now as you're spending time with these guys, either one-on-one over the coaching or in the wild? What's bringing you hope as far as men, fathers?
There's a really inspirational saga unfolding right now. I just did a cohort. I do a program called Men's Challenge Intensive, and it's not just for dads, it's just for men, and it's a weekend in the woods, and then it's a follow-up, digital men's group for a while. And we had a guy in there who's been struggling to finish, honestly, even finish a dissertation for a decade plus. And it's been his childhood dream to get his PhD And the weekend unlocked some shit in him, and I think in the first 2 weeks back or something, he's written like 87 pages of a dissertation.
Wow.
Like,
wow.
It's just like one of those measurable, tangible outcomes. It's just like, oh man, that's amazing. So, I mean, that's fun, right? But I think the bigger thing that's giving me hope is that since I began this non-standard way of working in the world and way of being in the world, like, it's never changed. When anyone, right? I work with men because that's my experience. But when the conditions are set for our fullness to come out, for our authenticity to be expressed, for our truth to come out, like, we're fucking divine, beautiful creatures. You know, we're good, and that aligns with my spiritual background and practice as a Vajrayana Buddhist. Right? There's just this concept of basic human goodness, where at the core we're good. You know, and that never not proves itself to be true, right? Ever. There only one kid ever do I still question, right? Like, I thought, like, when I'd go to, this is back when I was doing programs for adjudicated youth, and there was this dude, I was pretty clear there was a 50% chance he was going to crush my head with a rock at night, you know, when I went to sleep in my sleeping bag. But every single other 1,000 or 10,000 person that I'm working with, it's like, and I'm sure his basic goodness was there too, but he was just really, really, really hurt, you know? So
I want to kind of going back to you, and I found this is, you know, true of anyone I work with in any type of healing profession, that we're being healed in the work as well. Where is that healing for you in this? Where does working with men and fathers heal Dan, and how does that take place?
I mean, we could make a long laundry list of the things that have healed or grown from me doing this work. I think some of the core ones are things I named at the beginning here, right? Like growing up, normalizing my sensitivity, right? Finding a place for being a really aware and sensitive male in the world. That was a big one. Opening up my emotional capacity was a really, really huge one. On the other end of the spectrum, right? Like being more and more comfortable with my own strength and power and capacity for violence, for ambition, for aggression, for all kinds of things have been healed. And I don't mean that like I'm celebrating being violent, but just celebrating owning the natural capacities that are here, right? Currently, what's going on is I'm right in the middle of like a very substantial midlife crisis. like I'm in the intense phase of it. And I think I don't know necessarily how my work is healing that yet. I'm sure it is, but that's where I'm at. I'm at a place where I feel, it's been really interesting. Just where a lot of ways of being that used to make all the sense in the world to me don't make sense anymore. For example, I just want to be at home now, and I have a lifetime of, going away and having adventures and working away, and there's some sort of like major identity things going on right now, which is really kind of exciting.
Yeah. We're the same age, and so I have experienced a little bit of that as well. Especially going through some of the huge shifts that I've been through in my life. A lot of, everything shifting and trying to navigate away in a new way of being. But Dan, I always have a great way of crafting and framing things for us. I'm just so grateful that you sat down with me today and had this conversation. A lot of people are already familiar with you and your work, but if not, where can people connect with you, find out what you're up to? Where is that at?
Yeah, I'm like barely on Instagram, but I am kind of on Instagram. So _ Dan. No, I just changed it. It's Fatherhood Unlocked. Yeah, I just changed my handle. So that's one place. My homepage is dandoty.com. But what I'm most excited to share is fatherhoodready.com. which is launching for Father's Day this year, 2024. And it's a full holistic prep course for expecting dads. We do it as a self-paced digital course, and we also do it together in person. So yeah, and fatherhoodunlocked.com is the podcast, my podcast on fathers. Have to have you on sometime, and we have a community, building a digital community, support community for dads as well.
Amazing, man. Thanks for your time today. Thanks for the many years of work you've been investing into. I know what we both agree is this really important mission in the world with men and fathers. So Dan, thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Hey, thanks so much for watching, for listening. If you enjoyed it, one way you can support my work is by subscribing, by sharing, all of those things. Thanks so much. I'm incredibly grateful for your support.